Friends, welcome back. I'm here today with Erik Hodge over in St. Louis, Missouri, and he has been a COVID long hauler since about November 2020. And like virtually everyone who's had to face this, was left basically to figure this out on his own with people not really knowing how to treat it. And Erik was actually on the channel about a year ago, and he'd made some progress at the time, and it was really great that he shared his story because we knew even less about it then than we did now, and we'd hoped to do a follow-up interview one day to share his full recovery story, which is what we're doing now. Thankfully, he has put the pieces together and has so much more insight now on the recovery process. So he's here to share that story and those insights here with you today. So Erik, thank you for doing this. Again, it's so great to be able to do this.
Thanks for having me again. I appreciate it.
It's always every time we do these sort of partial recovery stories, the hope is always like, I can't wait to do that follow-up interview when you fully pass this. And so it's just so nice to be here and to see that you did finally get there. And for people who are watching, stick around to the end because Erik has a ton of insight from his own journey and has identified different phases in the recovery process that he's seen, and he's going to go through all of that. So I'm really excited to dive into all of that. Now, for people who didn't see the first interview, I'll link it above. I highly recommend you check it out. Really great stuff there. But for people who might not be aware, can you summarize your journey quickly as you can?
Yeah.
It's a big ask, I know.
Yeah, summarize long COVID quickly.
Yeah.
Obviously, everyone who's watching is probably experiencing it, has a loved one who's experiencing it. And so I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't already know. But I got COVID in November of 2020. This was pre-vaccination. They weren't even available yet. I got it at a wedding that I was photographing, and brought it home to my wife. We both had the typical initial 2-week infection. And mine just didn't go away. I had severe shortness of breath, and I was treated with, the typical steroids and all that other good stuff. And just over the months, I just succumbed to more and more fatigue, lots of chest pain, brain fog. I mean, so bad that I couldn't, like I said, tell you where spoons were stored in my own house. If you were to ask me, it was pretty bad. And for me, the scariest thing about this condition or the situation, whatever you want to call it, is it was so new and unknown. And that unknown is what made it really, really scary. And so I would constantly be Googling and YouTubing, just searching for long COVID cure, anything, any sign of a way forward out of this and how to recover. And really that's why and what drove me to start my YouTube channel and really track my progress and my recovery through long COVID. And that's really what the main point of what I'm looking to talk about today is the 3 phases that I saw myself go through in recovery and the distinctions between them and how you're in which one. And yeah, that's what I'm here to talk about.
And I've heard quite a few people talk about phases of recovery that they've noticed, and there does seem to be some overlap. So I'm curious and interested to hear about what you've observed. So what has this looked like for you?
Lots. I've seen several people, even on your channel before, speak about the different phases that they've witnessed. And I've taken inspiration from that, but this is just my way of organizing in my head the recovery process. And so before I get into it, I just want to make sure everyone watching knows this is my experience. It's just my story and what I can relay to others, and hopefully it helps and gives inspiration back and hope and all that other good stuff. So from a standpoint of recovery, I'm assuming that anyone who's looking at these 3 phases is looking at it from the lens of there's no actual internal organ damage or anything like that. This is more along the lines of autonomic dysfunction recovery, because that's what I noticed a lot of. My nervous system just went haywire from getting long COVID. And so if there's other issues, definitely I encourage people to go get tested, go to the doctor, get checked out for all those other things and make sure there's nothing else actually wrong. But after that, what I'm looking to share is applicable. So in the first phase is really, for me, it took about a year to go through the first phase of recovery. And like others, I kind of just call this finding your baseline. This is like post initial infection where you're feeling awful and you've got all your symptoms that are flaring and you're scared of when is this going to end? Why is this happening? That's pretty much the point in which we talked last. I was in the middle of stage 2. I had found my baseline and I had found some success in recovery and some healing. And so everything I talked about in that last video with you and I is applicable. So like the meditation, the breath work, the brain retraining, like all of what you hear other people talk about is really what's applicable in stage 1. And it's because I found it to be, my nervous system was just super hypersensitized to everything, that to find my baseline, I had to really retract and restrict my life and weed out the things that I couldn't handle, that I was oversensitive to, whether that's like different foods, activity at all. You know, I was in bed for like 6 months, so doing nothing but Googling long COVID. In this first phase, I find it very important to, it sounds funny, but really restrict yourself and become a recluse in order to set yourself up to heal properly. And no one wants to hear, well, you've got to really cut things out of your life, whether that's drama, whether that's, like I said, foods. For me, I had certain foods that I couldn't eat, like red meats and things like that. Anything that you can identify through trial and error that is going to trigger more symptoms, it's going to trigger your autonomic nervous system to flare up. That's really the goal of phase 1.
So a lot of people talk about finding your baseline. I think we all hear about this, and a lot of people tell me that they're really confused by that concept. And it sounds like your experience, or a lot of people's experience, is more about respecting your baseline, because most people are so sick and exhausted and overwhelmed. They're like, I don't know what my baseline is. It's nothing. Like, I feel crappy all of the time. What does that mean? Find my baseline. So is it more about getting rid of as much as you can in your life so you can see really at just your base, your core, what is happening without all that extra stimulation and stress? Or what was that process of finding your baseline for you?
You start to identify what makes things even worse. You start to it's just trial and error, like I said, and it's really not fun at all. Yeah, when I say being a recluse and cutting things out, that's anything that is you're hypersensitive to emotionally or physically or dietary or anything else, that anything that stresses you out more than something else normally. Like I know it's very vague because it's different for everyone. So it's not like I can point to one thing for everybody. But yeah, it's I don't know any other way but to say trial and error and find what triggers you.
I think that's a good point, though, about stripping things away, because when I recovered, I had to do something similar. I called it a healing bubble, and just everything that could go went. And it was friends, it was social life, it was, this was, at this point, I was already partially recovered, so I had more in my life, but it all just had to go so that I could just see what was happening and then notice when I did try things, like what was I reacting to, and have some control over that sort of gradual re-exposure to things and slowly building up an ability to deal with them. But first they all had to go so that I could figure that out.
Yeah. And this is like the least fun thing to do, is to tell people, hey, you really need to cut these things that you love to do out of your life, but it's short term, but it's temporary. How's that? It's temporarily cutting these things out of your life, because later on you're going to see in phase 3, at least how I see it, that's when you get to take things back and reclaim some of the lost or given up parts of your life. So
good thing to keep in mind. So what happened from here for you?
Yeah. So the way I knew that I was, looking back retrospectively, because I didn't go into this knowing I'm in phase 1. Retrospectively, I can say I left stage 1 or phase 1 when I started to have some good days. Like any good day, where you can go half the day without really feeling symptoms, or even a whole day. You can start to have good days. That's when you know you've kind of found it. You've kind of found what your body can accept and what your threshold is, what your baseline is. And that's when you know you can move on to stage 2. And stage 2 might sound redundant, but stage 2 in my mind is really just maintaining that baseline. And I really distinguish between finding that baseline and maintaining it, because it is going to take a lot of time to find it. And it's going to take, maybe equally as much time to maintain it, but and it's very difficult to maintain it. All this is a lot easier to say than it is to actually do. Because when you start to have good days, this is when you want to start doing more, and you make the mistake of overdoing it again. And that's when you have a relapse. And so if you could go into it with the knowledge of, this is my baseline, this is what I figured out that I can handle, and you can keep that going for months and months, that's when healing is really starting to happen. That's when your body is actually given the opportunity to go into the rest and digest, parasympathetic state, and really truly start to heal whatever went wrong in the first place, and whoever, who knows what that is. But that's where I found myself when you and I spoke last. Is I had found my baseline, I was maintaining, and a lot of my world was opening back up to me seemingly, and I was having good days. But I needed to continue doing that for many more months, probably another year after I found my baseline, just to give my body the chance to heal. This stage is not the stage to be pushing and try and push the envelope, push your baseline. It's really the time to just maintain. And the longer you can do that, the longer you're healing. And I found that I was leaving stage 2, or I had completed stage 2, when I would have pretty much I had more good days than bad days. I would have days where I could go several days without even realizing, I have long COVID, because I felt pretty normal most of the time. And I truly just reached a point where I could heal and not have to worry about that cyclical overdoing it, overdoing and relapsing, because I was maintaining that baseline.
So phase 2, that makes a lot of sense. And I love that you put a lot of emphasis on this, because it's something I hear from so many people over and over again. It's really hard to accept where you are and respect that, and not have that feel hopeless, because it's not about this is where you are forever. But without accepting this is where you are today, this week, this month, it's really hard to make progress. And it's easier said than done. But I think most people say, if not everyone, vital to start making progress. Yes, these are my limitations. They suck, but this is it. And I need to respect that.
On that point, kind of like some general thoughts that I tell people a lot is, you won't start recovery until you accept that you are sick, and you're going to be sick for a long time. You call it sick, call it a condition, whatever you want to call it, but you have to accept where you are, and until you do, no healing is going to happen. It's I kind of relate it to like Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, I think their first step is acceptance. Like, you have to accept where you're at, and until you do, you're not going to get better or recover. It's the same thing here. You have to realize and give yourself permission to be sick. Give yourself permission to, step back from some responsibilities, step back from some of the things that you love to do for a period of time, and knowing that this is in your best interest going forward.
And it can be a really hard thing to do when you have this vague, poorly understood condition with a crappy name. Yeah. Most of the world kind of expects you kind of just to push through and get on with it, I think. So it can be really hard. If we had a diagnosis that was understood, that was acknowledged by the world as a serious condition, then I think we would give ourselves more permission. But it's sort of like, this just doesn't feel like I have permission to go all in on saving myself right now. But it really is. It's one of the most devastating conditions, whether it's ME/CFS or long COVID, that I've come across. They are life destroyers. So I think treating them with that seriousness is really important.
So yeah, so like I said, once you get to the point where you're starting to have more good days than bad days, and you've stayed in this bubble or this baseline, that's after you've done that and you've maintained it for X amount of time. And I don't know how long it is. For me, I can tell you it was a year or so. And I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm to that point. I can start to push the envelope. I can start to reclaim some more of what I gave away earlier. I can reclaim some of that ability that I no longer had for the past 2 years, and start trying to reintroduce things slowly in a organized or controlled manner, and in a graded, a little bit at first and then a little bit more in a fashion like that. That's to me phase 3, and that's where I typically tell people I'm at. I'm in phase 3. I consider myself pretty darn well recovered. I don't have too much issue on a day-to-day basis, but I'm also going out and reaching for more. I'm going to the gym as much as I'm not going as much as I should, but that's everybody. But I'm able to go to the gym. I'm able to start that graded exercise therapy and start small and regain more and more ability. And that graded exercise therapy, I believe in our last discussion, I talked about how that's not worked for me. But there are things that are going to work in one phase that are going to be detrimental in another phase, like graded exercise therapy, because if you try and exercise in phase 1, I mean, you're just going to blow your baseline out of the water, and you're just going to go down a spiral of symptoms. But it's essentially, it's exactly what you need to do in phase 3 if you want to raise your baseline and raise your ability. Going through phase 2, when you've been maintaining your baseline's been your ability to withstand things, or your sensitivity to things, is actually going to be going down. Things won't be bothering you quite as much as they used to be.
So I do have a question on all of this. I like and appreciate this, understanding the different phases of recovery. And with all the progress that you've made, do you attribute it to respecting those phases, or have there been additional things layered into that have helped you to see progress with your health?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I have people who come through one way or another, try and glean some information, because I'm just a few steps down the road from others on this journey. And I would say yes, sticking to the limitations that you find yourself able to withstand or tolerate is a big deal, because it's not just time that's going to help you recover. It's time doing the right things, and these are the right things. As much as you might not want to admit it, this is where you are right now. So maintaining that is very important. And I always find it interesting or noteworthy that when I talk to someone, I know that they haven't quite accepted the fact that their body is going to be the one that heals them. It's not something that you're going to do to heal yourself, but your body's natural ability to heal. But I always know that they haven't quite accepted that fact when they're always looking for the next supplement or the next treatment or the next whatever it may be. They ask, well, what about this? And it's like, well, yes, there are some great supplements to take that are going to help your body, but really your job's not to fix you. It's just to get out of your own way, get out of your body's way, supplement it where you can, give it the nutrients it needs, give it everything it needs, but nothing you do is going to fix you. Your body's going to fix you.
I've definitely seen that from all the interviews that I've done, and I've talked about this before. what I noticed the trend with people through sort of stages is one, dealing with the nervous system, getting yourself out of that panic and that fight or flight and putting yourself in a position where you can actually heal. And then, which seems to be virtually everyone needs to address that. And then also the vast majority of people need to address some sort of neurological aspect, whether you call it brain training or the messages or the mindfulness or the positive affirmations, or, there's some sort of neurological aspect that happens. And then a third piece of it is some people, but not everyone I talk to, is addressing some of those underlying things that are there, whether it be, healing your gut or dealing with molds or heavy metals. And, because those things are all very real and can exist. But there's also an element of, okay, how come I was exposed to mold, as was this other person, but they healed and I didn't? So it seems like those things can be important for some people, but putting all your focus on them isn't the path out for most of us.
I would put it this way: mold or sensitivity to an external third party, if that's how you want to say it. I would say do the due diligence and make sure that isn't the case. Mainly, what I knew I didn't have any of that. I knew mine came about from COVID, and so I knew I didn't have those issues. I was like as healthy as a horse before COVID. And so I knew I didn't have any external factors.
Right.
But yeah, I would say do your due diligence and find out if there's anything else to a degree. Don't go down a rabbit hole of, well, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? There's some filtering to go on there. But, like I said, talk to a doctor, make sure there's nothing else that's wrong with you. But once you've kind of come back with all the tests that say you're normal and you're healthy and you're getting nowhere with your GP, that's kind of when what I'm talking about today, I feel, comes into play.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, for people who are watching who are facing long COVID or something similar, what general suggestions would you have for them, or for yourself? Like you said, you know a lot more now than you did initially. Kind of what would you want to say?
Yeah. First off, like I said, you just have to accept where you are and accept this is where you're going to be for a while and go from there. Stop Googling your symptoms. I think you hear that a bunch, but it's really important because that doesn't help in any regard. But it's natural to do that. It's natural to try and figure it out. I would say don't look at recovery day to day. Say, oh well, I'm terrible today. I must be going down a crash. Well, you need to look at things more like month to month. I know when I was recovering, in my earlier stage of recovery, when symptoms would start to go away, I could look back 2 months and say, I don't really have the same symptom that I did 2 months ago. And that's progress. Just gauge it. You need those larger windows to gauge where in recovery you are. I'd also say that doubt is the most natural thing, and that every single one of us is doubting ourselves at every single stage. I'm still doubting myself, and like I said, I'm fairly well recovered, and I'm like every once in a while, it's just like, man, I'm not getting anywhere. I'm not progressing as fast as I'd like to be. But there's always doubt. But that's why looking at it from month to month is a bigger deal than the shorter term. And then a big one is like in these different phases, each one has its own struggles. I wouldn't say one's harder than another. Well, okay, you feel worse in phase one, but phase three is no piece of cake either, because you have to keep yourself from overdoing it. And in the beginning, you have to start doing things that you haven't done in a long time, and it does cause some symptoms to flare up because you're pushing beyond that baseline, and your body's is still afraid a little bit. But you just have to teach it, yes, this is fine, this is good, and all the while raising that ability and that baseline. And then keeping in mind throughout each of these phases, you're not going to tell yourself what phase you're in. You can't just say, well, I'm in phase 2 because I want to be. Your body's going to tell you what phase you're in. if you try and say, well, I'm in phase 3, or I'm going to try and push myself and regain some ability back that I've lost. Well, if you're not there yet, you're going to find out really quick. And so be more reserved in the beginning and slowly work up to it. And I believe that people can probably move backwards in stages depending on where and what happens to them and what they do. And, it's not a quick fix. It's appropriately named long COVID. But that's just where I found myself in my recovery journey. So I hope it helps.
Oh, I'm sure this is very helpful to a lot of people. And for those of you watching, everything is linked in the video description for he's got a great YouTube channel where he's been documenting all of this and has some really wonderful videos. So everything you need to follow Erik and learn more will all be there. And I'm also thinking I'm going to link on the screen here, if you're enjoying this, another interview with an amazing guy named Kyle, who also had long COVID and fully recovered and has a lot of really amazing insights as well. Just trying to get as many resources out to you as you can, because I know this journey is challenging. So thank you so much for this, Erik, today. I really appreciate you taking the time to come back and do this again. I'm sure this means a ton to people out there who are also going through this journey, just to see that kind of light at the end of the tunnel. And any little piece, when you're watching these videos, if you even take one thing away, and I'm sure people will take away more, but just if it's one little light bulb that goes off that helps you, that's just a really incredible thing. So thank you for this today. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, like I said, any bit that I could find early on, any bit of advice or direction I was looking for. So that's all I'm looking to provide.
Yeah, no, amazing. Thank you. And thank you to those of you who are watching. Sending big hugs to you. I know this journey can be incredibly challenging, but keep at it. You have totally got this. I believe you will get there. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got something out of it. And I hope to see you in this next one that will be linked somewhere.